Every bottle, every bag, and every plastic container begins in an unexpected place, the depths of the earth. What today seems like an ordinary object is born from a dark, thick, and ancient liquid that passes through ovens, reactors, and giant molds until it becomes one of the most widely used materials on the planet. Plastic is in almost everything that surrounds modern life. It's in packaging, appliances, car parts, pipes, toys, technical clothing, medical devices, and thousands of everyday objects that seem simple but conceal an astonishing industrial origin. Most of these materials don't come from a factory producing finished goods, but from a vast chain that begins with the extraction of crude oil, continues with its refining, goes through complex petrochemical processes, and ends in molding lines capable of producing millions of identical pieces. Along this journey, a fossil resource buried for millions of years is transformed into polymers, granules, and finally into lightweight, resistant, inexpensive, and versatile objects. This transformation explains why plastic has come to dominate so many sectors of the global economy. But it also helps to understand why its production is one of the most impactful industrial stories of the modern world. The story of plastic begins underground. There, hundreds or thousands of meters deep, lie the transformed remains of organisms that lived millions of years ago. Over time, these organic remains were covered by sediments, compressed by the weight of new layers and subjected to the Earth's internal heat. In this slow and immense process, the organic matter was transformed into crude oil. This oil is the raw material from which much of modern plastic is made, but as it comes from the well, it is still far from being usable for making a bottle, a cap, or a flexible sheet. It is a dense, dark, and complex mixture of hydrocarbons, impurities, heavy compounds, and substances that must be carefully separated. That is why the first major industrial step is to extract it and take it to a refinery. Extraction begins with drilling platforms capable of penetrating rock and sedimentary layers to reach the reservoir. In some cases, the oil rises due to the natural pressure of the reservoir. In others, pumping systems are used to bring it to the surface. From there begins a massive logistical journey. Pipelines, storage tanks, specialized trucks, and large tankers transport the crude oil to industrial complexes where it will be processed. It's a continuous flow of raw materials that feeds refineries and petrochemical plants around the world. When the oil arrives at the refinery, it enters a crucial phase. It must be separated into different fractions because not all of it is suitable for the same purpose. Some parts of the crude oil will end up as fuels, others as lubricants, and still others as base oils for chemical products. The separation takes place in enormous distillation columns. There, the oil is heated to very high temperatures until it evaporates. As the vapors rise through the tower, its components separate according to their boiling points. The heavier fractions remain at the bottom. The lighter ones rise higher. In that column appears a key fraction for the plastics industry, petrochemical naphtha. This isn't the gasoline that goes into a car, but a specific mixture of light hydrocarbons that will serve as the starting point for the next stage. This naphtha is valuable because it contains carbon chains that can be broken down and rearranged to manufacture much simpler molecules, essential for all of modern petrochemistry. This is where one of the most important operations in the process comes into play: cracking. The word sounds technical, and it is. It consists of breaking large molecules into smaller ones using extreme heat and controlled conditions. In large furnaces or specialized units, naphtha is subjected to very high temperatures. Under this treatment, the long hydrocarbon chains fragment and give rise to simpler substances, such as ethylene, propylene, and other light compounds. These molecules are the true starting point for plastic. They are small, gaseous, or very light, and on their own, they do not yet form a solid object. But they contain the chemical structure that will later allow the construction of completely different materials. Ethylene will be the basis of polyethylene. Propylene will give rise to polypropylene. Other compounds will be used to manufacture PVC, polystyrene, PET, and many other families of plastics. What is impressive about this stage is that the process has already left far behind the traditional image of petroleum as a dark, thick liquid. From here on, the raw material enters a much more precise dimension. It's no longer just about separating fractions or heating fuels, but about manufacturing target molecules. The petrochemical plant operates almost like a carbon architecture. It takes complex natural chains and rearranges them to obtain highly specific chemical components. All of this happens in gigantic facilities where the scale is difficult to imagine. Pipes, heat exchangers, reactors, compressors, and tanks form a continuous network through which gases and liquids circulate under pressure. Sensors and automated systems monitor temperature, flow, purity, and composition. A minimal deviation at these stages can affect the entire process's performance. This is why petrochemical production combines colossal size with meticulous control. At the end of this first stage, the raw material for plastic is no longer crude oil, but a set of selected and purified molecules. They are simple compounds, but with enormous potential. Once the base molecules are obtained, the chemical heart of the process begins. This is the stage where plastic goes from being a molecular possibility to becoming a real material. It all revolves around one fundamental word: polymerization. A monomer is a small molecule like ethylene or propylene. A polymer is a very long chain formed by the repeated joining of countless monomers. In other words, the factory takes millions and millions of tiny chemical building blocks and connects them to produce long, stable structures with completely different properties. This change is enormous. Ethylene, for example, is a gas. But when thousands of its units bond together, the result can be a strong, flexible, or rigid solid depending on how the reaction is controlled. Polymerization takes place in specially designed industrial reactors. Monomers are introduced there along with catalysts and other process agents. The catalyst plays a crucial role. It accelerates or directs the reaction without being consumed as a primary raw material. Thanks to it, the bonding between monomers can occur in a controlled and efficient manner. Without these catalytic systems, mass-producing plastics would be much more difficult and far less profitable. What makes this stage fascinating is that small variations radically change the final product. Pressure, temperature, reaction time, the type of catalyst, and even the way the chains branch can modify the polymer's properties. Certain parameters yield a more flexible plastic. Others, a more rigid one. Some will be transparent, others opaque. Some will withstand heat, others will resist impacts or chemical agents. From the same family of molecules, materials with very different behaviors can emerge. Let's take the case of polyethylene, one of the most widely used plastics on the planet. Depending on the process applied, it can be produced in a low-density version, more flexible and suitable for bags, films, and wrappers, or in a high-density version, more rigid and resistant, ideal for containers, drums, lids, or pipes. The difference isn't due to some external magic, but rather to the way the molecular chains are organized and packed together. Something similar happens with polypropylene, widely used in packaging, automotive parts, technical textiles, and everyday objects, or with PET, which is used in bottles, fibers, and transparent containers. Each type of plastic corresponds to a specific chemical architecture and requires very precise control during polymerization. Inside the plant, this reaction doesn't occur in a small flask like in a school laboratory. It takes place in giant reactors where tons of material circulate under strictly monitored conditions. The goal is not only to make the reaction happen, but to make it happen uniformly, safely, and continuously. Sensors, cooling systems, automatic valves, and control programs keep the process within precise limits. If the temperature rises too high or the reaction accelerates uncontrollably, the polymer's quality can change. That's why the plant operates with almost surgical precision. When polymerization is complete, the initial result often doesn't resemble the plastic most people imagine. In many cases, a hot mass, a resin, or a semi-solid material is obtained that must be stabilized and conditioned. It still needs to be transformed into a useful form for transport, storage, and further processing. That's where the next step comes in: granulation. The produced polymer is taken to extruders or finishing lines where it is melted, mixed, and homogenized. Additives can also be incorporated at this stage. These additives are crucial. They can improve resistance to ultraviolet radiation, increase flexibility, modify color, facilitate molding, reduce brittleness, or make the plastic better able to withstand certain conditions of use. Commercial plastic, therefore, is almost never just pure polymer. It is a formulation designed according to its final application, This molten mass is then passed through dies and cut into small, uniform pieces called pellets or granules. These are tiny cylinders or beads, easy to transport and dispense. At first glance, they seem insignificant. But these small granules are the industrial form of plastic before it becomes concrete products. Each pellet contains a precise recipe of polymer and additives. Each one is ready to be melted again and will take the shape the market requires. At that point, the major transformation has already taken place. What began as buried petroleum and then became naphtha, ethylene, and propylene is now industrial-grade plastic. It's not yet bottle-shaped, but it's already a manufactured material with defined properties: flexible or rigid, translucent or opaque, lightweight, strong, and moldable. Pellets are the starting point for the last major stage of the process. They are easy to store, transport, and feed into industrial machines. But they are still not suitable for everyday use. They must be melted again, flowed, cooled, and given a precise shape. This is where plastic ceases to be an industrial raw material and becomes a finished product. One of the most common methods is extrusion. The principle seems simple, but the engineering behind it is not. The pellets are loaded into a hopper and fall into a machine equipped with a rotating screw. As they move through the cylinder, they heat up and melt into a viscous, homogeneous mass. This molten material is then forced under pressure through a die. The shape of the opening defines the result. If the die is tube-shaped, a continuous tube will emerge. If it is sheet-shaped, a film or sheet will be produced. If it is designed for a technical profile, the plastic will take on that shape. Extrusion allows the manufacture of films for packaging bags, pipes, coatings, filaments, and many other continuous shapes. It's a non-stop process. The machine can work for hours or days, generating meters and meters of material without stopping. When the hot plastic emerges from the die, it's still soft. That's why it must be cooled immediately with air, rollers, or water baths. This cooling sets the shape and prevents deformation. Afterward, the product can be rolled up, cut, or sent to another industrial stage. But when individual, precise parts are needed, the preferred method is another: injection molding. This process is behind a huge number of everyday objects. Bottle caps, appliance housings, toys, medical parts, car components, rigid containers, and thousands of other items are all made using this technique. The logic is similar at the beginning. The pellets are melted inside a machine. The difference comes later. Instead of flowing continuously through an open die, the molten plastic is injected at very high pressure into a closed steel or aluminum mold. This mold is machined with extreme precision and defines every detail of the final part. The plastic fills every cavity, every edge, every relief, and every surface. Then it cools, solidifies, and the mold opens. In seconds, a finished part appears. The speed of this system is astonishing. Depending on the size of the object and the type of plastic, a machine can produce hundreds or thousands of parts per hour, all virtually identical. This repeatability explains why plastic dominates mass production. It allows for the manufacture of complex objects with little waste, high speed, and great consistency. In other cases, variations such as blow molding are used, especially for bottles and hollow containers. There, a preform of hot plastic is first formed, and then pressurized air is blown into a mold, expanding the material until it adheres to the walls and takes the final shape. This is how many beverage bottles, cleaning product containers, and lightweight receptacles are made. It's another demonstration of the material's versatility. The same pellet can end up as a flexible sheet, a rigid piece, or a transparent container depending on the process used. Once molded, many parts undergo final cooling, trimming, and finishing. Although the mold has already given them their main shape, excess material may remain at edges, injection channels, or seams. Automated systems remove these excesses. Then some parts are drilled, assembled, or subjected to dimensional checks. Cameras, sensors, and operators verify that there are no defects, cracks, deformations, or surface flaws. Next comes visual identity. Many plastics leave the process with a neutral or uniform color, but they still need to be printed, screen-printed, labeled, or marked with wear indicators. On packaging and commercial products, logos, instructions, recycling symbols, dates, technical information, and traceability codes are added. Only then does the object acquire its final appearance and become recognizable to the consumer. The final stage is packaging and distribution. The finished parts are grouped into batches, packed in boxes or protective films, and arranged on pallets ready for shipment. Some products are sent directly to supermarkets or logistics centers. Others go to factories where they become part of a larger assembly. A plastic casing might end up in a household appliance. A connector might go into a car. A sheet might become food packaging. Plastic doesn't exist in isolation. It's integrated into a gigantic industrial network, and that's where the true scale of the process becomes apparent. Plastic isn't just a cheap and common material. It's the result of an immense chain that combines resource extraction, refining, petrochemicals, polymer design, additives, precision molding, and global distribution. All of this to manufacture objects that are often used for minutes, days, or years, depending on their function.